Welcome to Tribe Talk, everybody. You're here with Laura Neal.
I'm Rachel Evans.
And today we're talking about trauma-informed residential care.
So I think when people hear the word residential care, they often think of something that's quite institutional, something that's less personal, less relational, maybe less therapeutic. But in reality, when it's done really well, it can look very different.
Yeah.
So let's start the podcast with talking about what is residential care. So Laura, what is residential care? How would you define and describe residential care?
Yeah, so residential care, I mean, sometimes it's referred to, not so much in this country, but a group home. So it would be a home that has more than one child placed there from different families. Sometimes it can be from the same family, but you essentially have a staff team that are looking after multiple children in their care within one home environment. Now in the UK, that's usually between 1 and 4 young people. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it goes up as far as 6, but I think you mentioned that people can think of residential care as institutionalised, and you think of lots of people being within that environment, but actually residential care is more of a home environment where you might have 1, 2, 3, 4 children, sometimes 5 or 6, but more often than not, not that many. And they're all living together, they're supported by staff members, and it's very much a home environment.
Yes, definitely. And as you were talking then, I was thinking there are different types of residential care or residential homes, isn't it? That serve different purposes for children to meet their needs. So you might have homes that are purely for assessment or on an emergency basis where children go for a short space of time. You then have residential homes that provide more longer term care for children, and then looking at residential care for adolescents and then moving into adulthood. So there's lots of different versions,
yes.
I suppose.
Yeah. Rach, how are residential care homes different from foster care homes? How do they look different?
Yeah, I think from our experience of working with care experienced children, children with significant trauma histories that haven't been able to maintain foster care placements are usually placed in residential care, aren't they? Where they need a little bit more support. But the difference is with foster care, children are placed with a family. They have maybe 1 or 2 primary caregivers that are supporting them, that they're living with. And they might be living with their sibling or other children in the home, whether they're care experienced or whether they're the foster family's children as well. But in residential care, the child will be living with, like you said, up to four additional children that are all care experienced, have all individual needs. But the big difference is you have residential staff that are on shift. And we're going to get into this a little bit more, how it presents a barrier, but how we can overcome that as a barrier when we're providing trauma-informed care in a residential setting. But I think that is one of the big differences, isn't it, where there's multiple people that are back and forth to the home when they're on shift.
Yeah, so you have a staff team who are on a shift rather than a family who are caring for a young person. And one of the things you mentioned was that young people who have complex needs often need residential care, and that's a lot to do with there being a staff team there. So there's a staff team there that are equipped to meet their needs. They're still trying to create a family environment for that young person, but because there's a staff team and it's not just reliant on 1 or 2 primary carers, they are able to manage more complex needs.
Yes, yeah, definitely. And because there are more people that are there to be able to help and manage and support that young person.
So what a residential home might look like, many residential homes these days, they are actual family homes. So they're 4 or 5 bedroom houses that have been converted into a residential home for children. And then you might have 4 children, each of whom has a bedroom each in their own space, and a staff bedroom usually for staff who stay overnight within that residential home. And you'd still have your normal kitchen, your family room, your living room, where you go to watch TV, where you spend time together, where you eat meals together. So it looks very much like a family setup, but the big difference is that the children that are there are usually not related. They're there because they have more complex needs, and then you have a staff team that comes in and they change over on shift. So you might have a day shift and then an evening shift and a night shift, and those people who are caring for the young person are changing throughout the day.
Yeah, it's all about providing that family kind of home or vibe. Like, I've been to some homes, they have games rooms, they have gyms.
Yeah.
Some are state of the art.
Yeah.
Trying to provide a lot of different, like, variety of different activities for children.
Which are really important. One of the things we know is that if we can keep children occupied, give them things to help them learn and develop, then that can help them settle within environments. So some homes do have a lot more facilities than a family home would.
So there are some barriers, I suppose, that residential homes and staff are kind of faced with. You know, we just described the difference between foster care and residential care, and there is a big difference, and there's barriers that we have to overcome to make sure that we are mimicking that family type of environment and that home. So one of those things is staffing, isn't it? Homes are quite heavily staffed to support shift work. So what that means then is that, like you said, Laura, staff have got a day shift, evening, and then sometimes there's sleep-ins, and it's staff in that. So what that means is there's a high turnover of staff that are on shift, and that presents a barrier because there's new faces that come into the home at different times. So children might be a little bit unsure who's on shift at that point, but it presents more of a barrier for relationship building, doesn't it? When staff members are not on shift that frequently, they might do a 4-on 4-off type of shift pattern, but it's not as if you're with that child every day to build that relationship with them. So there's something that we really have to think about when providing trauma-informed care. Yeah,
it's very different from that primary carer-child relationship, because you have multiple primary carers who can change quite frequently within residential care, and it does then create that barrier.
Yeah. What residential homes, I think, are really good at doing, and what we advocate for as well, is having key workers.
Yeah.
So that child is assigned a key worker where they would complete some work with them on a regular basis, which supports some of that relationship building as well. But residential staff have to make even more of an effort to plan in how to build a relationship with a child, getting to know their interests, what they like. Have they got anything in common, you know, to have conversations around? But it's something that residential workers have to be really mindful of when working with young people in residential care.
Yeah. But you can create trauma-informed residential environments, and that's something that we do through our Tribe residential programme, is support residential homes to create trauma-informed environments for their young people. But there's some fundamentals that you'd put into a trauma-informed environment within residential care. And what about other barriers you've encountered?
Yeah, I think when you're trying to create this kind of family home, but you have a staff team, there's usually an office, and the placement of that office is really important, because you wouldn't typically have a staff office in your home.
No.
So trying to manage that, or sometimes we have to work with what we work with, you know. But when new homes are opening, we're always having conversations around, like, where's your staff office gonna be? Like, where's the best placement of that? Because that can present as a barrier where it kind of creates this us versus them type of situation. But yeah, that is another barrier, I think, in residential care, when you've got a staff office.
Yeah, that's in the middle of the home environment. Yeah. So residential care can look really different from a home environment and what you'd experience in foster care, but you can create trauma-informed residential environments, and that's what we support residential homes to do through our Tribe residential programme, is to develop and implement trauma-informed environments for young people in their care. And there are some core components to doing that. So should we talk through those, Rachel?
Yeah, definitely. I'll start things off.
Okay, go ahead.
Because I think the first thing that we do whenever working with a new home or with a new young person is making sure that there's an assessment that takes place. So getting to know the child. And we've done some podcasts on this, I think, previously, the importance of providing trauma-informed care. One of those key things is your assessment. So the child's trauma history, their current presentation, what are their attachment needs, what more do I need to know about this child to be able to provide then real trauma-informed care. So that is a must whenever we're working with young people, and homes, is really understanding more about their trauma history, their behaviours, to provide trauma-informed care. Yeah,
I think that's so fundamental, particularly in residential care. Just thinking about what you just said, looking at that trauma history and identifying triggers, you've got multiple staff members that are going to be coming in to support this child. They need to know what might trigger that child in terms of their past trauma. If they don't know, then how can they possibly provide trauma-informed care? Because they could be re-triggering past traumatic experiences just in the way that they're interacting. If we haven't done that background assessment and know about that trauma history. The other thing that comes up in residential care all of the time is the young person's attachment style. And you can have multiple young people within one home, different attachment styles, they need different things, and they can come into conflict sometimes as well, where you've got one young person who needs a lot of interaction, another young person who on the surface presents as if they don't need as much interaction, but then they can go under the radar and not get what they need because one young person is so demanding of time and attention. So it's really important to identify things like that attachment style early on, and then build that into your plans, which is where your trauma-informed care comes in. That's what makes it trauma-informed.
Yeah, and I think those assessments come in, they're really informative, and with the homes that we are supporting, it really helps make decisions on matching. You know, when you're talking about attachment styles, and you know we're trying to house, say, 4 children in a home, it's like, you know, matching plays a really important role there. Are children gonna get on to a certain extent, or is it a complete wrong match where, you know, this is not going to work at all? And our assessments really help to help, you know, make those decisions around matching.
Yeah, so every young person within residential care, they should have an assessment before they come in, or when they come into residential care. That should always be the first thought. How are we assessing this young person so we can make sure we're being trauma informed and meeting their needs?
Yeah. And another important thing that we consider when providing trauma-informed care to residential homes is how we create stability. And we do that in multiple ways, don't we? So one of those things is how we creating that structure, the routines, the boundaries, how we set in those clear expectations, and we do that in a variety of different ways. But children need that consistency and that structure and the routine. They need to know what has happened, or what is to happen, what is next in my routine, to help them prepare for their day and have that consistency that this is my home, this is what we do, I know what to expect.
And that consistency across young people who've come from different backgrounds, different environments, is really important to make sure that everyone can get along and live together as well. Because if you have different rules for different young people, then that can create conflict amongst them as well. And that doesn't mean that you shouldn't adapt to the individual needs, but you almost need your 2 layers. You need your base layer of this is how we all live together, and then this is your additional needs layer that you're adding in for each individual young person as well.
but having, you know, your home kind of values, your routines, that structure, that provides that foundation, doesn't it, to that everyone should be really following in that home, which mimics residential care, and the advice that mimics foster care and advice we would give to carers is having that structure and routine. So and that, because it provides that consistency for children, and the same goes for residential care. That is a master foundational strategy.
I think it also goes beyond for children within residential care as well, because it's consistency for staff. They all know they're all doing the same thing, they're all working in the same way. So if one staff member's on and the young person whose bedtime is 8 o'clock says, can I stay up till 9? On a school day, it's, well, actually, no, your bedtime is 8 o'clock, so let's start with your bedtime routine. And you haven't got different staff members saying a different thing to that one child, which creates lots of confusion. It doesn't give consistency. It then doesn't build that stability, and it doesn't build trust with our young people either.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's that consistency in responding, and like you said, in residential care, you are kind of running like a bit of a tight ship, where you know we have to provide consistent responses. Routines are set for everyone, and that just helps, like with the running of the home. So everyone is doing the same things.
And if you think in terms of trauma, something that might seem minor, like the time of a meal time, can be huge when you're thinking about children who've been neglected. They haven't always consistently had food available, and then when they come into residential care, if people are telling them different times for meals, that's going to give them no faith that they're actually going to get fed. So it's thinking about those things when you're thinking about residential care. That could be a trigger for a huge meltdown, because they're worried about, am I going to get fed today, because people are changing their time. So there's consistency, predictability, reliability is absolutely fundamental in trauma-informed residential care.
Absolutely.
So what about building relationships? Rachel, we know that building relationships and maintaining relationships is absolutely fundamental in trauma-informed care for all of our young people. But how does this present in residential care?
Yeah, so we've already talked about that, you know, there's different staff that come on shift. So the opportunities that residential staff worker would have to build a relationship is a little bit more limited than if you were a foster carer. But there's lots of ways in which we can build relationships with children. So we've spoken about key worker sessions and how that can support with creating those opportunities to have more positive interactions with young people. But I think we do this really well within our residential service, because we are constantly asking ourselves and our children that we're supporting, what are their preferences? What are their likes? What are their dislikes? So that's like one of the first questions that we ask in any piece of work that we do with children. But that's really important to understand. What are they into? You know, what common ground am I gonna find here with this young person to build relationships? So it might be that they enjoy playing board games, or they like making things, you know, arts and crafts. But once we know that information, we can make sure that it's part of their day, and how we're using like those activities to help build relationships with children, finding that common ground and the common interests.
Yeah, and those key workers can be those people who they know that they can always go to, and even if, because there's multiple staff, they might not be able to remember every staff member's shift, but if they can remember their key worker's shift, and they might have a little timetable up which shows them their key worker's shift, they always know that that person is going to be coming in at a specific time to be there for them. Yeah, which is important.
And I think it's about knowing the children in terms of their skill level, their developmental age, their chronological age, to know how you're kind of pitching information and pitching that interaction. So for example, we're working with a home at the moment, and it just so happens that there's younger children there. So staff are having to adapt their types, the way that they engage children, to make it more play-based, because they're a lot younger. Whereas they've had children that are approaching teenage years, where it is more conversational based. So yes, it's about like not making things like too childish then, and just pitching at that right level, so you can find some interest that you have together, and you can build on that then, and that's how you build a relationship.
Yeah, and I think within residential care as well, recognising that some staff will be better at that than others. So there'll be some who are very play-based and they engage really well with the younger children, and then some who are more adept at working with teenagers and play into people's strengths.
Yeah, and knowing what your strengths are, and where you're not really playing to your strengths, and being honest about that, isn't it? About and that becomes particularly important when, say, a new child comes in, or new young person, and they're looking to assign a key worker. That might not be playing to your strengths, and just having those conversations is important. So you're doing something that you're going to be really good at. But yeah, building relationships and how we do that is really important when we're trying to provide that family home type environment.
So another area that we're always thinking about is, we mentioned it at the very beginning, having enough activities for young people to do within residential care. And this can be really important. There is lots of changes of staff. The environment is usually new to them. So having an activity schedule where they know what's going on throughout the day and throughout the week can be really important, and important for their engagement. But we also like to use activities for learning as well. So we call it natural environment teaching, where you're teaching them different skills through day-to-day activities. And it might be a cooking activity, it might be a going to the shops activity, it might be a football game where you're doing a bit of maths when you're tallying the scores. There's lots of opportunities there, if you look at where they are, to be able to build skill building into daily activities. And for our young people, that can be so critical, because very often they've missed out on school, they've missed out on other learning opportunities. So we need to look at where can we build these in. So activity schedules kind of serve two purposes. They're keeping the young person busy, they're keeping them engaged, and they're an opportunity for them to develop and learn as well. Yeah,
this has become particularly important for some of our homes where children are not accessing education, and then spending a lot of time in their bedrooms. Their wake up times become later and later because they've got nothing to leave their bedroom for. Which is a sad thought to have, isn't it? But activity schedules was one of our first recommendations, to make sure that there are things that are planned throughout the day that's going to engage that young person. How we're building relationships, how are we creating that motivation, that intrinsic motivation for them to want to get out of bed in the morning and spend some time with the team, and do some activities throughout the day. So that's become particularly important, and can really now see the benefits of what that's doing for that young person. And then I think another area is planning direct work with young people. So from your initial assessment, you will have identified areas. 100% you'll have areas within residential care, they're there because they have more complex needs than other young people. You'll identify areas that actually need some more specific work done to support the young person, and that can be on things like emotions, it can be social skills, it can be things like hygiene. For our teenagers, it can be around puberty. And you're building in direct work sessions around those things that you know that they need to learn more about. Yeah, and again, another foundational type of approach where those sessions are really important, because that's where like the real skill building happens. Like you said, we're working with children with complex needs, so we need to do something else. We need to teach them something, for them to grow, develop, to support them in their next phase of life. And lots of that is around teaching them emotions, teaching them different functional living skills, how to be in the community, how to prepare a meal. So lots of things that come under that. But again, another fundamental.
Yeah, and you always do that based on their trauma history. So what is it that they've missed? What is it that they need to learn or develop? And the big question, what have they been taught in the past? Mm-hmm. Is there anything about this topic that is going to be re-triggering for them? Is there going to be anything that we need to go over because of their experiences? Mm. So with all residential care, it also isn't usually permanent. Very rarely is that the final option for a young person. Usually they go to residential care because they need additional support, but there's a thought of, okay, what comes after this? So as part of a trauma-informed residential home, you always need to be thinking about what comes next. Mm-hmm. And for our younger children, that might be returning to foster care or going back to family members. For our older young people, it might be moving on into independence. Yeah. So we're always thinking about that. So how do you approach that, Rachel?
Yeah, I think, again, the assessments become particularly important because we're identifying those skills that child might be missing and what we need to develop. But yeah, it all comes down to what does that child need to move on to the next phase of their life, whether they are returning to going back to foster care maybe, or going back to family, or we need to prepare them for semi-independent living. You know, it could be anything, but lots of our functional living skills come under this category where we're helping them to develop more independent skills around. Especially if they're moving on to more like a semi-independent home or something, how are they going to prepare a meal, how are they going to run a home, how are they going to do their washing, money management. So we're always thinking about those skills that are right for their age and their stage, and then what skills they're needing to move on to the next phase of life. But we are continually, once you've done that assessment, we're continually completing reassessments to see, how a child is progressing and where we need to move next. That assessment definitely provides that roadmap for us.
Yeah. I think there's so much that we could cover in what comes next for young people after residential care, and it takes really careful planning, doesn't it? So whether they're returning back to family, foster care, that's going to need a really good transition plan in place.
Yes.
If they're moving on to independence, there's usually a big plan of things that they need to learn before they can move on to independence. And then the big question, how are they going to be supported when they are independent? One of the biggest worries many of our young people have that come through residential care is who's going to support me afterwards. So that needs really, really robust transition planning as well. And I think this is why we do so much of this within our Tribe Trauma-Informed Care service for residential homes, where we're not just looking at the assessment, how are we implementing trauma-informed care, but it's how are we supporting young people to transition out of residential care as well, in a very trauma-informed way. Mm-hmm. It's actually one of the areas that I really love and value about supporting residential homes is when you get a child to a place where they can transition on to the next stage.
Yeah, and the goal is the same, for children that are in foster care as well. We want them to be able to progress and reach their full potential, that they can go on to go to university or college and get that job that they wanted. We really want to support those kind of dreams for them, and the goal is exactly the same. There's progress in all these areas,
and I think it's what makes a trauma-informed home different is you're always thinking about how are we being trauma-informed, how are we providing that reparative care to allow that child to move on to the next level of their development or growth or their life, wherever it is that they're going next. So that's all fundamental to our Tribe Trauma-Informed Residential Care Service, and I'll put a bit about that in the description if anybody is interested in finding out more about that.
Yeah, great. So we always end on a question. So this has come from a residential support worker. So how is it as a residential support worker, that your home is providing trauma-informed care?
Oh, that's a nice question. So I think fundamentally, for a home to be saying that they're trauma-informed, you have to be doing that trauma-informed bit. So where's your assessment, but where's your assessment? What have you learned about that individual young person's trauma from that assessment? And then how are you integrating that into the care and intervention that's being provided? So if you're a residential support worker and you're thinking, well, actually, I don't know very much about this young person's trauma history, then you're not in a trauma-informed home or environment, is what I would say. Homes that are trauma-informed, they have to understand that trauma history and then be supporting their workers to integrate that into care and intervention. So whether that's helping residential support workers to understand what that young person's triggers might be, why certain events or times of the year might have an adverse impact on young people because of their history, why certain people might have an adverse impact, but then also thinking about healing. How do we provide that reparative care? What has this young person missed out on? Have they missed out on emotional development, social development? How are we integrating that into our support plans, into our direct work plans, into the day-to-day care that we're providing?
Yeah. That's what I was going to mention, like, are you providing reparative care? That is so important. How are you helping that child and young person to come on and progress? Like, what are we doing to teach skills and to fill in those learning gaps that they've missed? Because that is so important. Because there's usually lots of things that we need to work on with children and young people. So that's the end of our podcast on trauma-informed care in residential settings. Key takeaways then for today is, asking yourselves, as a home, as a residential support worker, am I providing trauma-informed care? So those fundamental things that should be happening in a trauma-informed care home is having that assessment. Are you understanding a child's trauma history and their current presenting needs, and how are you implementing those strategies to support? Also, how are you creating stability, the routines, the structure, is that all in place? And how are you building relationships with children and young people as well? They are key things that should be going on in homes to, being able to provide trauma-informed care.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel. Thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed today's podcast, then subscribe to Tribe for more trauma-informed care in practice.